Japan, the longest lived women in the world. Women, about 40 times more female centenarians there than you'd see in an American population. And I got the idea that maybe there's lessons for us to learn. And I got an assignment at National Geographic to, in a sense, reverse engineer longevity by finding the statistically longest lived places in Okinawa, Sardinia, Ikaria, Greece, Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, and among the Seventh-day Adventists, and did a cover story at National Geographic and wrote a series of Blue Zones books. We call these places Blue Zones. And took a similar approach, and this is how we met, at trying to distill lessons on happiness from the statistically happiest people in the world. And that was what, once you can identify populations that are reporting the highest levels of well-being, then to go through and find out what their governments are doing, what individuals are doing, what the cultures are doing, in an effort to try to distill a set of lessons that we can adopt that I guess stack the deck in favor of happiness, and that's where you and I connected.
Yeah. So just really quickly, I know some people are saying my audio is a bit fuzzy, but rather than disconnecting, we'll just kind of try to ignore it for now. But I wanted to ask, what is the sort of clinical definition of happiness?
So that's an important question, because academically speaking, happiness is a meaningless term because you can't measure happiness. But what you can measure is something called life satisfaction. So if you take a random sample of, you live in Boulder, if you take a random sample of the 100,000 or so people who live in Boulder and ask them to think of their life on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being their best imaginable life and 1 being their catastrophe life, and to rate themselves, of course, you get some people on a good day, some people on a bad day, but when you get 3,000 or so representative sample, you can get a pretty good idea of how happy the place is. And there's enormous variation. In Boulder, by the way, which is if you control for wealth and ethnicity, Boulder is still one of the happiest places in America. And compare it to places like in West Virginia, you'll get about 20% lower responses on average in West Virginia than you will in Boulder. So something's happening in Boulder that's making people more satisfied with their lives. And again, we're correcting for income, so it's not just because there's a bunch of rich white people. And indeed, you look at Boulder, there's a lot of things going for it. There's easy access to recreation. There are no billboards reminding us to buy crap we don't need. There are the food environment is much healthier. There's a very strong correlation between health and happiness. And I'm sure, by the way, I know it's it's Mental Health Monday, but there's a big correlation between mental health and our physical health too. So Boulder's a place where it makes it very easy to be optimally physically healthy, and it's not a coincidence that they're reporting high levels of life satisfaction.
So, but that you raise an interesting point about it makes it easy to be happy. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because we do talk a lot about that.
Yes. So Blue Zones in general, my approach, and it's a little disruptive, for either longevity or happiness, I don't believe that you can will yourself to be happy. I actually don't even believe that trying to change your behavior is ever very successful in the long run. And when it comes to longevity, and I'd argue when it comes to authentic happiness, nothing you're going to do in the next week or month or 3 months is going to impact your long-term longevity or happiness. I argue that you have to set up your environment so you're more likely to be happy or live longer. And for both of my books, Blue Zones of Happiness and the Blue Zones Blue Zone Solution, I suggest how when you crunch all the numbers, it becomes very easy to see the things you can do to stack the deck in favor of longevity or favor of happiness. So your mindless decisions, the ones that as you move through the day are just fractionally better, but at the end it adds up to greater happiness, 20 or 30% greater happiness than if you're misdirected in your daily actions. So
basically what you're saying is that by minimizing the decision making we have to make in order to do healthy activities or happiness-based activities, we make 1% incremental gains, which amounts to massive gains overall.
Yeah, so for example, first of all, most of what we think brings happiness is either misguided or just flat out wrong. You know, this wild pursuit of success in America or financial freedom, even a complete freedom in our lives is misguided. That is not an answer to happiness. Well, here are the things that really bring happiness at both an individual, pursuing your values in life, both in your work life and your regular life, socializing with the right kind of people, up to 6 hours a day. The happiest people in the world are face-to-face socializing, having meaningful conversations 6 or 7 hours a day. Getting involved with philanthropy, volunteering. We know people all over the world are happier if they're volunteering. Sleeping at least 8 hours a night. People who are sleeping 6 hours a day, they're about 30% less happy than people who are getting a good night's sleep. It has a vast, minimizing the number of screens in your house. Another easy way to change your environment so you're more likely to be happy. People who own a dog or who've adopted a dog are marginally happier. So the Blue Zone approach would be all these sort of life hacks, these ways to set up your life so that you just mindlessly bump into a better behavior all day long. And before we suggested anything, we crunched data, tens of millions of data points, drawn from surveys done in 151 countries over the past 40 years. So it's a huge data set, and we know exactly what correlates with higher life satisfaction, with less worrying, with more smiling, with more laughter. We can't guarantee it because about 40% of your happiness or lack thereof is genetic. You can't do anything about it. 15% is chance. You know, if you're born with, you know, crushing depression, or if you're born with chronic pain, you know, you've got some challenges. But then about 40 to 50% for the average person listening right now, you know, like Sue Sabel, who's on there right now, it's really in your control, in your power. And I would argue even for people struggling with mental illness, there are still things that you can do to manage it for a better outcome by shaping your environment the right way.
So that brings up a really good, because I do these mental health Mondays things. I think there's a misnomer that, like you said, that happiness is somehow, it's like you choose to be happy. And it sounds to me like what you're saying, and everything that I learned with you is that you don't, it's not a choice. It's actually a conglomeration of small decisions that we make throughout our day that help us move in a more healthy direction.
Yeah, yes. First of all, I don't believe you choose to be happy. And I hate these, you know, these telemarketers that say, you know, happiness is a choice. It's not really a choice. And even these positive psychology schemes of appreciation journals and savoring. Yes, you know, all these studies are usually done with students, graduate students, and they're done over a period of a month or something like that. And maybe they work for a month, but as soon as the study stops, then the effect stops as well. It's like, would you be healthier on a vegan diet? Absolutely. I mean, a whole food, plant-based vegan diet, no question. But nobody can stick to a whole food, plant-based, vegan diet for long enough to make a difference. So why do it? So about 25 years ago, a University of Pennsylvania professor, a researcher by the name of Marty Seligman, who was the president of the American Psychological Society. And the whole industry for years was focused on mitigating or to put it in a positive way, augmenting mental health for people who were suffering from anxiety and depression and other. But the whole industry about 25 years ago shifted over to trying to take an average person and making their lives better, reporting higher life satisfaction, more positive affect, less negative affect. And really our project, Corey, was to find out if you canvass the earth to look for the people who are getting the best outcome, what is happening in their cities, in their homes, and in their social networks. And that's really the story that you and I did.
Yeah, and we went to Singapore together. We went to Boulder, Costa Rica, and Denmark, which sort of represented 4 enclaves of happiness. Why are those places individually happier? And then I want to take some questions too.
Yeah, there's a lot of great questions here I'm seeing. It's really, first of all, I love this engaged audience. Your pals from around the world here. So sociologists can measure 3 types of well-being, or we call it happiness, but it's not really happiness. But there are 3 approximations of happiness. One is how you self-report how satisfied with your life. The other one is kind of an experience happy, how you experience life day to day, moment to moment. And that is, you're asked, you see, when people evaluate their lives, if I ask you, Corey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with your life? You'll think, yeah, I was on the cover of Outside magazine. I was the best photographer at National Geographic. I'm a big stud. A lot of people like me on Instagram. I'm pretty, but yeah, I got this mental health thing. You'd say, yeah, I'm very satisfied with my life. But the thing is, you only remember about 2% of your life. We tend to remember 2%. The high points and the low points, and we remember what happened in the last 24 hours. The other 98%, like if I asked your audience here, somebody wrote, he's a stud. I'm just reading it. But if you ask people to remember what they had for lunch a week ago Tuesday, they can't remember it. So we really don't remember much of our life. So the question about on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with life? That gets one sort of facet of happiness, how we think about ourselves. I call it pride, but essentially it's evaluating our lives. And then the second metric is how we experience our life. And the way researchers do that is they hook you up with a device and they ping you and they ask you to remember the last 24 hours, how much you smiled, how much you laughed, how much you felt worry, how much you felt anger. And the how we experience our life and how we evaluate our life, there's only about a 0.5 correlation. In other words, people can say, I love my life. A billionaire will typically say, yeah, I'm very satisfied with my life. But if you look at their day-to-day experience, they typically may have a troublesome spouse, and they're worried about their huge portfolio, and they're worried about the skeletons in their closet that they accumulated making the $1 billion. So, and then there's a third type of happiness, which is purpose. How often do you get to use your strengths to do what you do best? That's like the technical definition of purpose. And we have data on all 3 of those. So when you take, I can't do the graph, but, happiness, and if you do how you evaluate your life, how you experience your life, and then purpose, you can get a pretty good idea of, you know, if you maximize those three things, you know, that's probably as close to happiness you can get. So we found Singapore is the place with the highest evaluative happiness. We found in Costa Rica in the Central Valley, the area where people have the best day-to-day experience. And then in Denmark, the type of happiness, they excel actually in all three types, but the type we covered, and your coverage there was nothing short of brilliant, but that is a place where people live out their values and their purpose. They're able to do, they actually, part of their schooling is to learn what their passions are, what they're good at, what they love to do. And most jobs, whether it's furniture making or architecture, which you also covered so well, most jobs, people are expressing their purpose, not just showing up for a paycheck or for status or because they're scared as hell that they're not going to be able to cover their health insurance bill.
Right.
So by profiling these three areas, we profile three facets of happiness, and then in there we also include, here are the things that you can do to stack the deck in favor of happiness in each of these three ways.
So it brings up a really interesting point. I saw one question that asked about, and again, sorry about the fuzzy audio. It asked, you know, right now during these very strange times, how do we engage with people during COVID? You know, like, I mean, that's because it really has impacted our community engagement.
Yeah, and I'm rather disruptive on this one too. I have the strong suggestion now, notwithstanding the people who've lost a loved one, you know, or you know, lost a business or something like that. But first of all, according to Gallup, only about 30% of Americans actually find purpose at work. In other words, they're calling it in. They're showing up and they're burning good life for a paycheck. Yes, a lot of people lost a job, but I would argue the jobs they lost give them an opportunity to reboot and an opportunity to get a job more in line with their heart and their passions and their purpose. Number two, I think it brought families back together again in many ways. I mean, and sometimes, you know, there's big blowout, there was a divorce, but I think in the majority of cases, kids came home, they were forced to live with their parents, siblings got closer, and in many cases, couples got closer. I just think it gave us a chance to relearn the art of cooking at home. Every time you eat at home, you eat about 300 fewer calories than you would if you went out to eat, and they're better calories. It's a family activity. And I think people connected on Zoom the way, you know, we're connecting right now. It's not as great as we're sitting across from each other having a cup of tea, but it's pretty darn good. You know, you and I actually have had, I think, some of our best conversations during COVID because of ramifications of COVID, but because, you know, we had time, you know, and it became a priority. So I know I didn't exactly answer your question about, you know, what we're doing during COVID, but I would say that don't just look at the negative. I would say identify the positives that came out of COVID and try to keep those going in your life. The relationships, the Zoom connections. You know, I actually don't think it's a bad idea to connect with people on Zoom like we're doing right now.
Somebody asked an interesting question about environment, and I know there's some correlation with water too. Can you talk a bit about that?
Oh yeah, so this was Gallup, and this is in the United States. So Gallup has a very good set of data called the Well-Being Index. You can Google it. But they found a very strong correlation in cities that the quality of water and also the number of dentists predicted the happiness of the whole town. So if you have good water and good teeth, people tend to be happy.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. I actually forgot that.
And we don't, you know, it might just be because, you know, there's better government, there's better government administration if they're producing, you know, if the water is a priority. and it's high quality water. And dentists might be indicative of, you know, how well people take care of themselves, because if there's a lot of dentists, there's got to be a lot of people showing up to the dentist, and because they're caring for them, because that's a priority.
Do you feel like this idea that you know, we move the goalposts around a lot around happiness? I got into a good school, now I got to get into a better school. I got a good job, now I got to get a sort of a promotion. How does moving the goalposts have an inverse effect on your happiness?
Yeah, I mean, it's important, I would say, to have goals and achievable goals. And if somebody's moving the goals for you all the time, that's certainly not a recipe for happiness. But when it comes to work, it's far, okay, so, you know, for most American families, to maximize the evaluative happiness, how we evaluate it, you need about $75,000 a year. The average, you know, it's, if you live in New York or probably Boulder or Los Angeles, it's going to be more, but on average, $75,000 for a family of four buys you kind of a sweet spot of, it buys you basically all you really need for happiness, for how you evaluate your happiness. You need even less money to optimally experience your life from day to day. You only need about $60,000. So after that, you're burning good life. If you're killing yourself to make 150 grand a year, yeah, that is just a bad strategy in life. So first of all, you need to make enough. You need food and shelter and health care, and you need some mobility, and your kids need to be educated, and you need a little bit of money to treat yourself once in a while. That's important, and take a nice trip once in a while, but you don't need to wear Rolex watches and Gucci. It doesn't really bring you happiness. So when it comes to work, number one, you want to make sure that your job allows you to live out your sense of purpose and allows you to use the strengths to do what you do best. Secondly, when it comes to a workplace, you want to make sure it's a workplace where you can be socially connected with people around you. So a workplace where they do lunches together or where they do happy hours together. Americans are horrible with taking vacation. The optimal amount of vacation per year, this is according to the Danish Statistics Office, is 6 weeks a year. And so each extra week brings you more satisfaction up to 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, a certain, like, actually, I like to feel useful feeling kicks in. But you know, Corey, in America, we take on average 11 days of vacation a year. So when it comes to work, you should be maximizing your vacation. You should be pushing for that, maybe even making a little bit less money. Same with the number of hours we work. In Denmark, on average, they're working 37.5 hours a week. People who are working part-time, 30, 35 hours, that seems to be about a sweet spot. If you're an average American and working 45 hours a week, you're basically burning 10 hours a week where you could be doing something else. And then the other important thing when it comes to work, it's important that it's close to your home. Nobel Prize winner Danny Kahneman discovered that when it comes to how we experiencing our days, moment to moment, day to day, the least happy activity that Americans report is their commute back and forth to work. People, wow. It's like the worst time of our day. We're frustrated. We're wasting time. People are honking at us. We're sitting on our butts, not getting any exercise. So whatever you can do to minimize that automotive commute, you're going to improve your work life, or your work day anyway. So, but
does that have a correlation to productivity and creativity as well? Like overworked versus hitting a sweet spot?
You know, I would argue Danes are way more productive hour over hour. You know, I talked to the editor of their big newspaper there, who went to Yale, and he worked in America for a while, and he worked in Denmark, and he says, yeah, Danes only work 30, 35 hours a week, and, you know, they kind of knock off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but when they go to work, they put their heads down. they're not checking their Facebook account and yammering away at the water cooler. They're working. Where he observed that, you know, the American workplace, they're spending a lot of time, you know, doing activities that aren't work, and they're calling it work. So yeah, productivity and efficient use of time, I think, is an important aspect in
so
how satisfied you are with your life.
For people like me who suffer, I don't want to say suffer, but I work with mental health issues. Again, sorry for the fuss here. Are there things that we can do, or extra things that need to be done to combat that mental health component?
Well,
or is it just additive? Is it just adding more of the same that we talked about?
So, you know, I mean, there's different kinds of, you know, there's so many varieties of mental health. Are we trying to mitigate depression or mitigate anxiety, or are we taking the average person and making them, you know, more satisfied with their life?
Well, let's start with first, because I think depression and anxiety are the things that are most prevalent, and especially right now during COVID, and that could be because of lack of connection and things. But I'm curious, in that sphere, is there anything specific, or is it just, like I said, more of the same?
Let me tell you a quick story. Sir Richard Layard, London School of Economics. So a few years ago, he posited that if most of depression and anxiety is treatable with even just 14 or 15 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy, a good therapist will resolve about half the cases of depression and anxiety. Now, of course, there are some people where it's intractable. And he also figured out that if you solve if you did indeed lower these cases by 50%, he found out that people suffering from depression and anxiety were driving about 50% of emergency room visits. They were driving about 50% of social services. They were committing more than half the crimes. People were having these issues. And he figured that if you just gave a whole city free cognitive behavioral therapy and did some advertising and marketing of trying to reduce the stigma so that people would actually show up, that even though it costs a lot of money, you're going to save money in the short run. Well, this was during the Cameron government. They actually got a city. They hired and trained 770 therapists for this small city, so that and then they did the marketing campaign. Indeed, got most people with depression and anxiety in front of the right therapists, and they drove down those mental illnesses almost exactly as he predicted, and also almost exactly as they predicted. The hospitalization and drain on social services dropped. And what he also discovered, that most of the unhappiness in a population is driven by these, you know, the 16 or 70% are suffering from one of depression or anxiety. So by focusing the intervention on those people, they were able to bring up the happiness level of the whole city. And since happiness is contagious, if we're hanging out with happy people, we feel happier ourselves. So it had a secondary effect. So the point being here, we vastly underinvest in mental health in this country. And it would be a great investment, not only just for, you know, the humaneness of it, but more importantly, it would be a great economic return as well.
What are the legislative steps? I want to get more granular into daily life, but I'm also curious, like, what countries are doing it right in terms of, you posted a meme that said, we try to fix health, whereas other countries legislate for it.
Yeah, when it comes specifically to health, So we know what's making people unhealthy in America. It's our toxic food environment. Over 45% of every retail outlet, whether it's to get our tires changed, our oils changed, or to go pick up our diabetes medicine, we have to run through a gauntlet of chips and sodas and candies, and we're genetically hardwired to crave sugar and crave fat and crave salt. The number of fast food restaurants has risen by a factor of 30 since 1970, and not coincidentally, the rate of obesity has tripled and the rate of diabetes has gone up by a rate of 7 times greater. That's not because Americans are bad people, or we lack individual responsibility, or we somehow have gone slack. It's simply our environment has changed to make the unhealthy choice unavoidable. And cities who really care about the health of their communities, they're legislating, or they're changing the code, limiting the number of fast food restaurants. We know that if you live in a neighborhood with more than 6 fast food restaurants within a quarter mile of your house, you're about 40% more likely to be obese than if you live in the same neighborhood where there are fewer than 3 fast food restaurants. Same with billboards. We talked about billboards and happiness. We know that if you live in a neighborhood where there are billboards, your BMI, or your obesity rate, is about 10% higher than the same neighborhood where there are no billboards. So a city who actually cares about people and not just lining the pockets of the billboard owners will, like Boulder has, will say no billboards in our city. And guess what? Nobody misses them except for the billboard owner.
Right. I mean, I miss some clever advertising, but I really don't miss billboards. So that's really fascinating. I think what's the connection, just from the Rome audience, because they're partnering with me on these Mental Health Mondays this month for mental health awareness. Can you talk a little bit about activity and specifically being outside?
Sure. Well, I think it's okay. So access to nature is huge, and it's good for depression, it's good for anxiety, and it's good for the general happiness. So you could tell somebody living in Harlem, they should get out to nature, but it's so hard to get to nature. So cities, and Singapore was a good example, and Denmark was a great example. They make an enormous investment in parks and green spaces so that people don't have to travel far for it. And lo and behold, those numbers are lower. The mental ill health is lower, and the mental health is greater. So I would say, and then physical activity is damn near a panacea for just about every, I don't care what mental health issue you're dealing with. The optimal amount of physical activity is about 60 minutes a day. And by the way, you don't have to be training for a marathon. You don't have to be a Corey Richards getting ready to run up Everest for the 87th time. All you need to do is walk around your block. Grab a friend and walk. And I think it's one of the greatest things you can do for your body and your mind.
That's funny. You've talked about that a little bit, that the best form of exercise for happiness is sustainable exercise. You're pretty opinionated about that. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yes. So again, I tend to think in populations more than individuals. So what will a population actually do? I can raise the physical activity level of an entire city by about 30% if I can get that city to adopt a complete streets policy, like Boulder has done. And what that means is that every time a new street is redone, there's a bike lane, there's sidewalks, there's trees. So if you live in a place like Tallahassee, Florida, or even Miami, where I am right now, which is, it's to ride your bike to the grocery store is tantamount to committing hara-kiri. You're at the bottom of the transportation food chain, and motorists don't give a crap about you. I'm not going to ride. I mean, well, I ride my bike, but nobody else rides their bike because it's too dangerous. So if you build your streets for humans and invite humans to walk to the store, walk to the coffee shop, walk to their friend's house, walk out to eat, and make it comfortable, safe, inviting, aesthetically pleasing, people will do it. And that kind of mindless visit, that's very blue zones. People in blue zones aren't pumping iron, they're not running marathons, they're not doing CrossFit, they're walking to their friend's house. They got a garden out back. And you say, well, what's your, well, these people are making it to age 95, 100 at higher rates than anybody else in the world. They're doing so with very low rates of mental illness, with the world's lowest rates of heart disease, lowest rates of diabetes, some of the lowest rates in cancer. They're doing it not because they're doing all the crap that gets marketed to us all the time. It's doing it because they live in an environment where walking is easy, eating beans and nuts and greens and grains and tubers. The Blue Zone diet is the easiest, cheapest, and most delicious. The option to be lonely, to sit up in their room by themselves and play Fortnite for a week on end, is just simply not an option. Somebody will be pounding at their door, going, get out, you know, the festival's going on, or, you know, it's church day, or we need you for this help. Every time you walk out your front door, you're bumping into your neighbors. And, you know, we put too much burden on individuals to know the right thing to do and to make it easy for them. A community, and we saw this around the world with longevity. You and I saw it with happiness around the world. If you want a happy, healthy population, you shape their environment, evidence-based ways to shape their environment so the choice that stacks the deck in favor of happiness and healthy is easy or unavoidable.
So one funny thing, so I am a CrossFitter. I love it, but I think it's almost more for the community. And you also mentioned church. Is the benefit of faith about the community, or the benefit of CrossFit about the community, or is it double?
Of what, church?
Yeah, like church or faith.
Yeah, so, you know, so when it comes to faith, if you live in a religious society like Latin America, you're more likely to be happy if you go to church than not. But if you live in a place like Denmark, which is not very religious, having a faith doesn't really make a difference. When it comes to health, actually showing up to church adds about 4 years to life expectancy. So as a rule, yes. First of all, I wouldn't force yourself, but let's take a month of Sundays and try different faith-based communities to find one that resonates with you. Yeah, I would say that is a good idea. A good idea for most people, for both happiness, but especially for health. Because people who go to church or temple or mosque, think about it. They have 1 hour a week where they slow down and they focus on something bigger than themselves, for sure. They're less likely to engage in risky behaviors and get involved with drugs, which has a connection to other facets of mental health. They tend to have a better social network. And though I'm not a particularly faithful person myself, I cannot completely discount the possibility that there is some God. And, if you worship God and ask for health or happiness, that who knows, she may bestow it.
So I like that answer. I'm just trying to look at some questions.
Here's one about I'm more spiritual than religious. So the problem with spirituality, you cannot measure spirituality. So if you can't measure it, you can't really study it. They measure religiosity simply by, they ask people how many times they show up to temple, church, or mosque, and then they ask them how satisfied they are with their life, or they measure heart disease or diabetes or even life expectancy. There are these retrospective studies, epidemiology studies, and you see very clearly people who report the highest church attendance also report the best health, and in many cases, the best mental health.
So I just saw a question about how do we find our real purpose. And again, for everybody listening, I apologize for the buzz, but I want to answer that, and then I want to give it to you, Dan. I think oftentimes we're forced into this idea that we're supposed to know what we're passionate about, and that's actually, and then when we don't, we get really down on ourselves. I've found that by basically throwing spaghetti against the wall, trying a lot of different things, curiosity, I've found my way into different passions, and it's more of an organic process than I'm trying to find my passion. In fact, I feel like that blocks a lot of purpose that we can find. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. First of all, you're right. I do think trying a lot of things and not just getting sucked along and, you know, what pays me the most or what everybody else around me are doing. But I advocate sitting down at a blank screen or a piece of paper, just take 15 minutes and have 4 columns. And one column is what I like to do. The other column is my passions. My third column is my values. And then the final column is what I have to give. And I would just write very short phrases in each of those. And then once you've written that out, maybe 10 things in each column, then look for the commonalities. And I see almost all the time, it becomes very clear, like maybe it's I love animals, and my value is reducing the suffering of animals. And, you know, I already work at the Humane Society. It becomes really clear when you actually do that internal inventory, which hardly anybody ever does. But take that 15 minutes to do that internal inventory. I'll bet you what appears on that page is a pretty good idea of what your purpose, or in Okinawa, they call it ikigai, the reason I wake up in the morning. And you know, is it a panacea for everybody? No, but it's a good start.
That's also an interesting point.
Somebody asked me to say it again, so let me just quickly say it. Yeah, we get a bunch of those. So 4 columns. What I like to do, what I'm good at, what my values are, and what I have to give. So 4 columns, and just write down what those are. Short phrases, they can be two-word phrases, and I think you'll start to see a cluster emerging from there that gives you some direction.
And I'm just piggybacking on that, in that, like, doing these audits, we often talk about it, make a list, right? But you actually have to sit down and do it. You have to make the list. That's when it becomes clear. So often we have these self-help books and we read them, but we actually don't do the exercises in them at all. And the actual exercises are that's where all the mining happens.
Yeah, you got to do some work.
Yeah,
but it's kind of a fun exercise. I don't know. I mean, a piece of paper. It doesn't take very long. I mean, you could do it after you get done listening to us, and I'll bet you something appears. Purpose, by the way, people who, this is epidemiology, but people who can articulate their sense of purpose in a phrase. I am good at resolving conflict. I am good at solving problems. I am good at being a stud and a photographer. People
we all need
a
clear
about that live about 8 years long. People who live about who can report, who know their sense of purpose clearly, live about 8 years longer than people who are rudderless. So it's super important, by the way, to be clear on that. And, you know, there's a lot of, you know, you and I are kind of looking at other chapters in our lives. And I thought you and I have had some really fruitful conversations because we both work for National Geographic. We're both explorers, and, you know, we're both, you know, kind of we're weirdos in a way. We're outliers. the fact that the two of us can get on the phone and talk it out for an hour. So like-minded people who really care about you, with whom you can have a meaningful conversation, that's another very fruitful way to start to discern that path forward in a way that will resonate with your soul.
But that you bring up, you're a mentor to me, you always have been, as well as a friend. Can you talk a little bit about the role of mentorship?
Well, I think when the student is ready, that the teacher appears. Thank you for saying that. I didn't realize as a mentor. I remember actually when I got assigned the happiness cover story for National Geographic, I was, your name preceded you. I was told I was going to get the very best emerging photographer at National Geographic. I'm just being a reporter, I know it. And I got on the phone and I thought I'd hear this cocky, hubris-laden individual, but you came into that conversation curious. The story was important to you because of the struggles that you've gone through your entire life. You've really thought about it. You were interested in that story because not only did you want to do a good job for National Geographic, but because you want to discover something for yourself and discover, once you discover it for yourself, and by the way, you're very generous with taking the things that you've discovered and sharing them with people. There's lots of things you could be doing right now for an hour, but instead you're sharing, you're being vulnerable. I noticed that in you right away. And I happen to have been studying happiness for 10 years. My head's full of these sort of, fun and sometimes useful facts. And I think you and I connected at the right time. I've been thinking about these things and had the research, and you were hungry for it. But a long-winded answer, of course, if you can find a mentor that can help you, who's at the next level where you want to be, it's absolutely golden. But, you have to be kind of careful because, there's this whole industry of personal coaches and who are kind of imbued with this, helping you get very successful and make more money and, set big goals and break it down into weekly objectives so that you can sort of maximize your financial freedom. I'd be careful about that. You want to really be careful of what you want to be mentored towards. And so there's a 25-cent answer to a nickel question.
I'll take it. It made me feel good. I appreciate it. And somebody just asked, are there biomarkers for happiness?
Sort of. I mean, like in Tibetan monks, they can do these MRIs to their brain, and they can see that when people are deep in meditation, which, by the way, is a great idea for happiness, but people who meditate often, their parts of their brain that's right in front of here actually light up when they're meditating. Those are the parts that register pleasure, and other parts where would normally be lit up with stress are not lit up. There's endorphins. To a certain extent, I don't know if you guys read *Sapiens*, but Harari argues that happiness is simply how often you can trigger your endorphins, these sort of happiness hormones. But I think the best marker we have today is asking people, a broad range of people, to self-rate their own levels of life satisfaction and day-to-day pleasure and worry and sadness, and correlate it to what they're doing. Because at the end of the day, if you think you're happy, you kind of are. And as long as you ask a random sample of enough people, you average out the sort of liars and the people underreport. And this is actually work that received a Nobel Prize, so it's valid.
Somebody just wrote something that I want to address. They said the answer's inside of you, and I want to push back on that a little bit, because sometimes the answer is inside, like the answers to big questions in our lives. Yeah, that can be inside of you, but the answer to happiness, in many ways, are contributing factors that we build around ourselves. So I don't want people to mistake that, like, that's a very reductive way of looking at this. Happiness is built. It is a structure that is in place around us. So I just want to address that. And they asked,
I would say, I've become a big meditator. And by the way, I recommend this Sam Harris Waking app. It's a great way. Meditators are, that's the only behavior I really believe in. And this idea that happiness is inside you, I think to the extent that your mind works.
Oh, there you go. You were muted for a second.
Yeah, to the extent that you know how your mind works, and that you can't really control what you think next, and that the way you react to things may not be how you really feel about them, and to get to the point where you can slow your brain down and feel when you do things wrong. Like I assert that when you lie or mistreat somebody or hide something, that if you sit quietly, you don't need a 10 commandment to tell you that that's wrong. That will burble up. You will feel when you're doing something wrong if you sit quiet enough. If you're listening to music and running all the time and busy, yeah, I think that internal wisdom your listener is referring to is often muted. It's often covered up. So there's some truth to happiness is inside, but I don't think it's a choice, really. I think you have to do something.
That was the Waking app by Sam Harris, right?
The Waking app, yeah. I'm a big fan of that Waking app, actually. And I have nothing to do with it, by the way. It's not like a promotional one.
Yeah.
I paid to say that. I just use it every day for 10 minutes.
Somebody asked, is happiness correlated with longevity? And that connects all.
Yes, it is. It's a great question. It's about 80%, 0.8 correlation. So, for example, the blue zones of longevity are all in the top 10% of the happiest places in the world. And indeed, the happiest places are longest lived. Denmark is one of the longest lived areas in Europe. Singapore is the second longest lived area, which is one of our happiness places, has the second highest life expectancy in the world. Costa Rica, we found a blue zone in Nicoya, Costa Rica, lowest rate of middle-age mortality in the world in the Nicoya Peninsula. And indeed, where we found the happiest people, also in Costa Rica, up in the Central Valley, not too far from San Jose, actually. So they travel. You almost can't pull them apart. Happiness and health, they're like this. And if you pull out happiness, health tends to drop. And if you pull out health, happiness tends to drop. So you really want to be cognizant of both of them.
Somebody just asked a really good question that you hit on. What about giving and service? How much does that play a role?
It's huge. We know that volunteers have lower rates of heart disease. They have measurably lower rates of healthcare costs even. They report higher levels of happiness of anywhere in the world. Another related factoid which people tend to love is in places where there is gender equality, the men tend to be happier than the women. And in places where women are mistreated, the women are happier than the men. It's counterintuitive. So in a way, it's, guys in general, it's in our best interest to treat women fairly and equally, not apart from the fact it's just the right thing to do, but it's really you know, you look at the data, it's just so clear. You know, I mean, some of these places where women are locked down and mistreated, and they can't go out, and they have to wear clothes they don't want to wear, and they can't drive. You know, I don't want to pick on any one country, but I think we probably all know where they are. Oddly enough, women are happier there, and it may be because they sort of cluster together in the injustice. But I suspect is the men aren't all that happy because they're being dicks.
Yeah.
Can I say that on the Corey Richards podcast?
You can say whatever you want. I can't endorse anything. I can just say, yeah, you can say whatever you want. I want to really quickly talk about that inverse relationship between suicide and mental health as well, because people always flag that in Denmark. What is that? How does that relationship exist?
Yeah, so it's not really. So I actually talked to the head of the Danish Statistical Office about this. So Denmark, you know, for a long time it was called out as the highest level of suicide. But a couple things are happening there. First of all, they've dropped a lot in the last 15 years. They're like now down to 10 or 11. But he believed that the Danes are very straightforward and honest and have no qualms with, you know, if daddy shot himself in the head, that's how it's reported. Whereas in some Latin countries, where if daddy committed suicide, it would often shame the family. That death often gets reported as an accidental death. So we believe there's the reporting's not exactly apples to apples. So, you know, the honest people kind of show up worse. But
okay.
Anyway, one more question, and I got to jump. Not that I couldn't talk to you for another 4 hours, and we could do part 2 if you want some time.
Let's do it.
All your beautiful followers out there, or I should say companions, not followers. I hate that word. Companions, Instagram companions, want to do another. I'm happy to come back someday.
Well, do you want to, maybe rather than answering one more, can you just wrap this up for us in a kind of a concise, digestible, directional statement about what happiness is and what it isn't? Because I think for people that maybe missed the beginning, they didn't get that, and I think that's really helpful. It's more helpful just to have a picture of what it is, so that we can move towards it. Yeah.
So, first of all, happiness itself is a academically meaningless term because you can't measure it, but you can measure how you experience your life day to day, moment to moment. You can measure how people evaluate their life, and you can measure how often people get to use their strengths in their daily lives. And we know very clearly from worldwide data what activities correlate or predict higher reportings in each of these areas. And as a rule, if you want to get happier, you're not chasing money. First of all, you're sleeping 8 hours. You're waking up and you're having a low-fat breakfast, ideally an oatmeal or beans or something, not sugar, because sugar is going to send your blood sugar up, and then you're going to be sluggish. And if you eat a bunch of meat or eggs or cheese, you're also going to be sluggish. You want to spend about 6 hours a day in work where you find purpose. You want to spend about an hour a day volunteering or doing something altruistic. Somewhere in there, you want to spend 4 to 5 hours socially interacting. You want to be on social media, and we know this statistically speaking. You want to be on social media less than 45 minutes a day, unless, of course, you're watching the Corey Richards Instagram feed, which you can do that all day and be happy.
Of course.
TV, the same thing. The optimal amount of TV is somewhere between a half hour and an hour, which actually makes you a little happier after that. You're probably doing it at the expense of more important things. And you want to take a nap. People who take a nap 20 minutes a day report higher levels of happiness, and also they have about a third lower rate of heart disease. And if you want to know more, you know, I'm at DanBuettner. I have an Instagram too, and I try to give sort of hacks on how to be live longer and be happier every day. And my pictures aren't as beautiful as Corey's, but I promise to have useful information and just a dollop of my charm.
Just a dollop, just a dollop.
So
It's a lot of charm. Hey man, thank you so much for being here today.
I love it.
Yeah, and we'll do it again, man. We'll do it again. A lot of people want part two, so we'll figure out something else to talk about.
I had a blast, and I want to thank everybody who came with us today. Thank you very much. I actually saw all the kind things you guys said, and I just want to say it means a lot to me. And somebody said, I'm a stud too. Whoever that was, I love you. So here, I'm sending you all a big telephonic hug, and I'll see you next time.
All right, man. Take care.
Right, ciao, ciao.
Ciao. So that was DanBuettner, a dear friend of mine, a mentor of mine. He has studied happiness for a long, long time, and I had the great opportunity to work with him and really dive into it. And so I hope you guys pulled something from that. I will, if I don't screw it up, I'm going to save this, keep it on my feed, and then hopefully put it into my Mental Health Mondays. Again, I want a big thank you, shout out to Rome. If you guys don't follow Rome, Rome is my partner on Mental Health Mondays for Mental Health Awareness Month. They promote basically being outside, seeking adventure for the express purpose of finding purpose in life. Adventure with purpose is really how we like to encapsulate that. I'm going to be doing more of this stuff. If you guys are enjoying it, let me know. If I'm doing something wrong, let me know. Feedback is essential. Again, sorry for the scratchy audio. I don't know why that happens when I do Instagram Live, but something gets weird. But anyway, I really appreciate you guys. I'm going to do an Ask Me Anything later again today for Mental Health Mondays and try to answer some questions. And for all of you who are asking, I'm great. I'm doing awesome. And I will always be honest with you guys and keep you updated on how I am doing because I feel like that's what this is about. So take care, big love, take care of yourselves, and we'll talk soon. Later.